Brenda first. Brenda first, then Dave, and then Barry. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Gordon, and thanks, Dr. Zehr. It was a really wonderful tribute to Liz. It was really captured a lot of her vision, and I think a lot of your value systems are the same. I remember when Barack Obama was inaugurated, and I was listening to his speech. And it was really, he used a lot of good stories, and restorative justice advocates like good stories. So he talked about the stories of their founding fathers of the land, and he used a lot of that imagery of the founders of the nation, and storytelling, and digging into the roots of who they are and who they wanted to be. But there was one thing in particular that he said that really struck a chord with me. He says, we don't have to give up our values in the name of security. And I thought that's true. And I think we do that a lot in the name of security across a range of institutions, starting at the school level. You know, we give up our values in the names of rules and consistency and things like that. And we do it in a number of different institutions, all the way up to our correctionals, you know, where we really think about security of domestic security. And I think that really resonated a lot with Liz Elliott's book, because her title of her book is Security with Care. And if you haven't read the book, I would highly recommend it. You get Criminology 315, 12 chapters, 12 weeks, and it's, you know, it's cheaper. I'm sorry. So,
and you're looking for work.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Shouldn't have said that, but, you know, tenure's not up yet. But okay. Anyways, so I think we do give up a lot in the name of security, and in particular, we give up our values. And values are really important to Liz Elliott. The theme that she ends her book on is for each of us to declare ourselves as individuals to the values that build the relationship with ourselves, with our community, and with the earth, is what she said in the final chapter of her book. And she used the parable of the hummingbird to begin that chapter. And you have to notice that it just has one little drop of water coming off the beak of the hummingbird here. So it's in small steps that Liz worked, and it was those small steps that built an amazing capacity and brought together a huge range of people. People in her own backyard, in her own community of mission. So she built a strong foundation of community-based restorative justice in her hometown of Mission. And we shouldn't be surprised that in her own backyard there was a federal institution. and she worked a lot in that federal institution in two main activities, the Alternatives to Violence program and Favor Group. And Favor Group in particular was her home circle. It was something really deeply important to Liz, and for Liz, that's where she said life got really real, because they had to get real. That was the only way out of a federal institution, was to be real with yourself and for others. And so she did a lot of circle work based on a core set of values in that federal institution. So she really, by living her values, you know, one step at a time in terms of the parable of the hummingbird, and the parable goes something like this, is that there's a great fire in the forest. And all the animals flee from the great fire. They go to a safe place. And that's what we all want to do when we feel injustice, is we go to a safe place to keep ourselves safe, away from, you know, the harm, by way of analogy, of the fire, and we run to a safe place. But there was one little, and that's and all the animals, even the big animals, the big strong bear, and the big strong bear turned to the little hummingbird and said, "What are you doing, little one?" And he said, "Well, I'm doing what I can." And for me, that's, that really is the essence of Liz Elliott. She really turned and she went to the hard places where we all have to go. And sometimes the hard places is in the federal institutions, and sometimes it's in our own backyard or around our own dining room table. And so, you know, when we talk about restorative justice as being, you know, a backyard movement, you know, get it happening in our backyard, I think, you know, for Liz Elliott, it did happen in her backyard, but more importantly, it happened around her dining room table. So when those inmates came out of the federal institution, one of the first places they went was to have a meal with Liz's family. Excuse me. And so for me, that's really the essence of restorative justice. And instead of creating sort of hierarchies, Liz was more about, you know, a social movement in terms of a campaign. So anybody could step up. It didn't have to be a professional. And there's a large range of literature that talks about the deprofessionalization of justice in the name of restorative justice. Because once we have professionals, we expect someone else to do it. And I remember a number of years ago, one of the speakers at the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education here in Vancouver, they brought in Jody Williams, and she won a Nobel Peace Prize for banning landmines campaign. And she built a campaign, one person, one fax at a time, because it was before emails. And there was a group in Europe who wanted to create an organization to keep people in Europe organized around this new initiative. And she was really against it because, and in her words, she said, once we create an institution around a new idea, then we professionalize it, and then we create hierarchies, and then, you know, we expect someone else to do, because it's their job, or that's not my job, and we sort of push the problem up the hierarchy. But she says what we really need is a campaign, and I think that's what Liz Elliott did. She created an amazing campaign that everyone could step up to. People in her own backyard, they stepped up to it. People in the correctional facilities stepped up. And it was about a campaign that anybody could step up to. And it was really at its core were the 3 R's that you mentioned. Is, you know, relationships were important to her. And I know through working with her, she built a number of good relationships with her students. She wasn't just an academic that, you know, dealt in lofty ideas. She really connected well with her students. Every day they would come to her office hours and talk about personal things as well as academic concerns. And, you know, and it wasn't a huggy, soft on crime initiative. Taking responsibility and being accountable was really important. But she offered respect to every single person who had the pleasure of walking beside her. So, oh, it's so hard. But I think what Liz really taught me and many other people to do was, in terms of this art-based process, was to dance on a shifting carpet of a justice system that we haven't figured out yet. And learning to dance is something we can all do together. So thanks very much.
Let me just make a short comment here about reading the book. The restorative justice course that's offered at in the School of Criminology is now offered in 3 locations and is also offered online. So it goes out through Surrey, through the Burnaby campus, through the campus across the street behind my back, and also online. The problem for me as the director of the school is meeting the demand. So quite frankly, if you just want to read the book, that's fine. I don't have enough resources to offer the courses that have now been accumulated around the title, Restorative Justice. I think that in and of itself is a great memorial to Liz Elliott. Dave Gustafson.
Well, first of all, I think we've heard a very fitting tribute to Liz in Howard's lecture, and quite frankly, I think in Brenda's comments too. moving and heartfelt and in the moment. I, first of all, was struck by the title, Tapping, Focusing, and Sustaining the Moral Energy. And if anyone ever modeled that, I think it was Liz. She was able to tap into the whole question of awe and mystery and wonder in ways that were really quite remarkable. And able to do that in the most pragmatic of ways. I've never seen anybody who could be so focused on doing what needed to be done, preparing a huge meal for whoever might show up, a dozen people, maybe 20, who knew? While still answering phone calls and marking papers and dealing with visitors coming and going and who knew what. And parenting Chris and Maya and leaving them a legacy that is so rich. I can't wait to see what they will do with that legacy. They're awesome young people in their own right. And trying to carry on some of their mother's traditions already, I understand Maya's learned to build, or to bake quite a pie. So I'm looking forward to that sometime soon too. Looking forward to visiting Milton and their household sometime for another one of these ongoing dinners. At any rate, I think the things that stood out most to me, Howard, in your inaugural lecture, that I think really is fitting, and I'd like to see it posted. The whole question about as long as there is awe, there is seeing, and the embracing of mystery and ambiguity. Those things, along with respect, create opportunity for amazing things to happen. And I think that really does sort of pay tribute to who Liz was and to her own moral vision. She certainly had a moral compass. And there would be some people who suggest that Liz could be something of a needle. She was highly opinionated. She wouldn't draw back from what she thought or felt. She could actually be a thorn in the side. If it was always gracious, it was always truthful, but she certainly made her views known and was fearless and courageous about that in ways that you had to really respect. She managed to gain the respect, even though she was on the other side of the fence very often, with correctional authorities, on citizens advisory committees, all kinds of things. And these would be the very ideas that she'd be bringing to them. The things that Howard has so beautifully articulated. Just looking around this room says something to me about the number of people whose lives Liz touched. Many of you are here today by virtue of your personal relationships with her. And you would maybe know, if you've listened to Liz long enough, that Howard was one of Liz's mentors. Maybe not personally. They never got to know each other well, as I had the privilege of doing, studying with Howard. But certainly through his work and through the things like Transcending and Changing Lenses, and the books that, Doing Life, I guess, was the other one, right? The Prisoners at Craterford. Just things that continued to say to us, these are possibilities. These are possibilities. This stuff can happen. And I think Liz and I have frequently had discussions about how do we take it up a notch? How do we challenge systems? How do we move this into the criminal justice system or into spheres where it wouldn't normally be considered? Thinking outside the box is just far too cliche for Liz. But how do we take this vision to ground somehow and see it rooted and planted and growing 30, 60, and 100-fold in new and different ways? And it would be, in her mind, grounded in communities. She didn't have a lot of time for the esoteric and, things that were hierarchical and systems-based necessarily. She believed that stuff needed to be grounded, and it needed to be grounded in places you could touch, right near you in your own community, in your own heart, in your own personhood. So that's the challenge that I've known in my relationship with Liz through all those years. And very, very grateful for her, and feeling like that whole question, which ends up in my mind with the metaphor that was so beautifully portrayed about these prison walls cracking in face of the truth-telling and the responsibility-taking and the heartspeak and the things that happened in that meeting. Those would be things that Liz would be very familiar with. and certainly on a weekly basis we are too. There are people in this room who've been through that experience, many of them. It's just a delight to see the people here that are here. Prisoners, ex-prisoners, people who've done so well following their release from prison that they're examples in and of themselves, who've caught this vision and have done marvelous things with their lives, and are a tribute to all that they've learned, tribute to, I think, to Liz's vision for them, because without exception, the people I'm thinking of had close relationships with Liz by virtue of her commitment to be on the inside and to watch those walls crack. And for that, we've loved her and all that she has given us and challenged us too. And Howard, I can't imagine that you could have done a better job of capturing all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Barry.
You know, I think Liz would be pleased that I have a headache from so many new ideas that have been floated by once again. Thank you very much, Howard. And thank you for making me cry. You're bad.
You too.
But I'm going to follow a different path. My favorite philosopher is Monty Python. And Monty Python has always taught me, and now for something completely different. And so I'm going to go to someplace completely different, and so bear with me. First of all, Howard, I agree completely that we have to keep ourselves in balance. You know, if we don't do that, this is not a 100-yard dash we're in. It's even a longer marathon than most of our lives will be. Because it is about changing something that got changed a long time ago. As Dennis Maloney used to say, the ideas we're talking about. I had this discussion with Liz. There's nothing new that we're talking about here. What we're talking about is an ancient idea whose time has come. We're talking about something that everybody used to do in every single culture. Certainly I've learned from my 30 years of working in Aboriginal communities that they have been able to hang on longer than we did to the idea that we can't have winners and losers when we have decisions about working out differences, that there are no disposable people. And we will dispose of ourselves if we don't keep that balance. You can get really angry about what's happening in our justice system, and that anger will take you to depression. I know too well. So we do need to find a different way of coming at this problem. Now, Howard talks about, the idea, some things I disagreed with what Howard said. I don't think that the ideas that incorporate this thing called restorative justice are really failing. I think, Howard, we need to change our lenses and look in different places. If we look at our schools now, particularly in the States, where they once had this notion of no tolerance for violence, and pretty soon at the end of the year, 50% of the kids were in the street, not in schools. And then they started using these different restorative justice practices in the schools and began to teach kids as early as grade 2 or grade 3 to sit in a circle and have conversations. So you look there. The second place you look is you begin to look at the things that are happening in the business world. In the business world now, collaboration is a whole new meaning than it had in the Second World War. What it does mean is businesses recognize that problems are so complex and so challenging that they need to work together to get out the other end. I have been using, since I stepped back from the justice system, many of these restorative practices in corporations, in major public issues from nuclear waste to fisheries. And it's amazing when you create a safe place for people to have difficult conversations, how you move from argument to dialogue. For me, we gotta stop focusing, frankly, on the justice system. It's like we're standing in the justice system and we're watching all these dead bodies go by and we're pulling them out of the river and nobody's going upstream to see where the problems are coming from. I'm doing a lot of work recently with kids in care. And the reason I do that is because as a judge, I put a lot of kids in care. And then as a judge, I saw those kids that I put in care show up in front of me as juvenile delinquents. And recently I've been doing some work in the jails with Liz. And once I asked everybody in the circle to put up their hands if they'd ever been in foster care or in state care. Of the 27 people in the room, how many do you think put up their hands? Yeah, 24, basically out of 27. So for me, we have to go upstream. The problem is not in the justice system solely, it's in our communities. We've lost a sense of civic responsibility. We've lost the capacity to work with each other. The participatory skills that we once had in each of our cultures a long time ago have completely atrophied. We don't know how to talk to each other. We don't know how to listen with each other. And if we don't go there and we keep trying to see what the new silver bullet's going to be in the justice system, we'll bounce back and forth like New Zealand's about to do, and like Jerry Miller in New England tried to do. And over and over and over, we'll see, you know, we'll try this experiment, and then 20 years later, when the institutional memory is no longer alive, and we've done a whole bunch of other things, we'll go back to this thing again. We fundamentally have to come at these problems in a different way. So here's a Monty Python idea. You're talking about privatization. Well, I remember Dennis Maloney and I having a huge fight about privatization with a couple of legislators in Texas and a few others in Alabama. And we walked away and we both had this idea about judo. And the idea was, okay, if we can't stop them, how can we figure out how to do this in a good way? And here's what we came up with. Hail Mary, privatization. You don't pay corporations for locking people up. You pay corporations for rehabilitating people. So the money that they get is a royalty based on the number of years that one of the people who goes through their system doesn't recommit offenses. You pay them on the basis of how the risk factor that they present to themselves and to others drops over years. And you see whether or not you can harness this huge innovative organizational energy in the corporate world to turn what people who are going through our state prisons, by the way, at huge recidivist rates, coming out the other end. If you really look at our jail system, there isn't any incentives for those jails that are getting more and more crowded every day to actually rehabilitate. It's in their mission statement, it's in their language, but you sure have a hard time looking for it, and will have a harder time looking for it if those jails get overcrowded. So one of the ideas is, let's think about privatization, but on a fundamentally different profit basis than just paying people, corporations, to lock up. And if you do that, then there's no reason why a bunch of farmers, a First Nation, a couple of people couldn't do, on a privatized basis, take in some inmates and try to see if they can do something different with their lives. I mean, why would it have to be a corporation? Why couldn't it be a John Howard Society? Why couldn't it be anybody who wants to get together and take some responsibilities? Here's another crazy idea, and I completely agree with Howard on this. We don't have any imagination about what the alternative would be to the justice system. We need an alternative that people can imagine things happening in a different way. So there we were, Dennis Maloney and I at his place, watching the Green Bay Packers play. Now, the Green Bay Packers are Dennis's favorite team. He is an ardent, passionate fan about the Green Bay Packers. And at halftime, Green Bay is losing, and Dennis says, well, you know, Green Bay is just a small town. It doesn't have an awful lot of money. Imagine what Green Bay would do if it had the same money as the other teams. Boy, we would win every single year. Struck me that, yeah, what would a restorative justice process designed from stem to stern do if it had the same kind of money that the other, like the Dallas Cowboys and stuff have? And so we started this notion that, well, we live in America. He lived in America, I didn't. But America's all about competition. What if we set up a competition between a normal criminal justice system, whoever thought of criminal justice system being normal, right? But if we set up the mainstream criminal justice system against a restorative justice system and went head to head to see where the money should flow. Because I disagree with Howard, the cost effectiveness is clear. absolutely clear. If you look at the recidivist rates coming out of prisons, if we only did half as well as they do, the cost effectiveness would be outstanding. The last thing, and you cut me off when I'm going, because once I get going here, it's hard to stop. Although my headache's going away because some of the ideas are coming out of my head and going into the room. You know, I think that I made a big mistake when I started doing restorative justice some 25, 30 years ago. I said, nobody's going to get paid for doing this. Nobody's going to get paid for doing this. Big mistake. The mistake was based on thinking that we needed to get civic response, we need to get the community involved. And if you pay people to do this kind of work, it's fundamentally different. And one of the early experiences certainly proved that. One of the poster boys that came out had 60 different criminal offenses to his record, went through a circle and came out absolutely a different kind of person completely, like he went through a tide wash. And he had, part of his community work was to run a men's talking group. And 3 years later, you know, 1,000 hours more than his community work was required to do, he was out at 3 o'clock in the morning talking to people who wanted to take a hit or wanted to do something that was going to get them off their program. And he was an amazing success. So they paid him to do this work. 2 months later, he quit because he said, if I'm there at 3 o'clock in the morning with somebody, they know I'm only there because I care for them. They know I'm not there to be paid. So somehow we have to find a balance, though, because I do think that the volunteers who come forward do not want to be just glorified gophers for the justice system. They need to be able to be supported by other professionals that are working for the community justice system to make sure that the volunteers come out and are able to make the same good decisions on good information and supported, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to invest in communities to create the means for volunteers to be able to participate as effectively. If I go to a community justice process as a judge, I have tremendous resources behind me that allow me to participate in that process in an effective way. The community people who come out don't have those resources, don't have that kind of help, and they end up burning out because they end up doing a whole bunch of things that they haven't got the resources or help to do. The last thing I want to say is, you know, and I think Liz would be foursquare on this. We have the experience in this room. We have tons of experience in this room, but we haven't gotten together and being able to sort of take that experience in some way and learn from each other and begin to design something that Howard is saying we need to create so that people can imagine something different. Many people that I've talked to just understand that the criminal justice system and our prisons particularly are terrible things, but they say, what else can we do? Well, there's experience in this room to find what else we can do. And we need to meet in ways in which we can gain from each other. We've probably got 1,000 years of experience in this room, given that this movement's only been 30 years on, and given, like I say, it's an ancient idea whose time has come. This is nothing new. This is the way we should be talking to our children. This is the way we should be discussing with our children what vacation we're going to take. It shouldn't just be about difficult things, it should be about good things too. That should be the way we make decisions with one another. Respectfully, listening to others, and trying to be open so we're not argumentative, we're not trying to defend positions, we're trying to find new ways to do things.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry. Okay, questions. The floor is open now for dialogue and for questions. There were a couple of people who weren't able to speak before we took the break. Would you like to go now? Okay, thank you.
Thank you to all of you. And Barry, it's actually your words that I wanted to bring up earlier. Maybe restorative justice, and Catherine, your paper on restorative living, maybe it's the water we swim in. Maybe it is the way we travel in our journey rather than the destination. I know that if we want to look at cases, there are organizations that provide the non-adversarial model to solving things. Many of them don't even say the word restorative, but everything they do is in the practice of restorative justice. Because restorative is the vehicle, not the destination, it actually doesn't matter what job you do or what career or what project that you embark on, but perhaps because you deliver it in this value-based restorative way, you still come out with great outcomes. And we all do that. We all do it together. We do it in our communities, in our families, in our places of work. And Liz would remind us to just keep that integrity. Just keep doing it. Don't worry if nobody else says it's no good. Just keep doing it. It grows. And it grows because I can see us all in here, and more than half of us know each other, and we're all happy to be together. And thank you to the panel and to Howard, but it is the water we swim in.
Thank you, Mary. Any response from anybody? You can engage with the people who are responding, if you like. Okay, yes, sir.
It's been my experience that many of the programs, and you talk about recidivism, the prison education program, for instance, that was operated first at UVic, at the BC Pen in late 1970s, and then taken over by SFU in the 80s and 90s, and it was started by Dr. Stephen Duguid. Many of the people who took higher education, university level programs through there went on and became graduated from SFU and UVic with degrees and whatnot, and stayed out. They found out that through that, the recidivism rate for people who educated themselves while they were in prison dropped down to something like 16% or less. And for those 16% that did go back inside, they weren't for the same or type of charges that would have thrown them back in. They went back in for technical violations of their parole. The Four Pillars approach, community-based, and community courts here has had a significant impact on people within the community and going back and returning back to the prisons. I've been working in this area with Claire Culhane, who you see the image over Liz's left shoulder, and with Liz in the West Coast Prison Justice Society, and operate prison legal services out in Abbotsford for a number of years. And I find that a lot of the stuff that Liz believed was community-based, and and she would be and has been horrified at the approach that the government has taken, what I call the fear factor, in getting a loud majority or a loud minority to push for more draconian laws within Canada. And I just find, anyways, thank you.
From what I've heard and know about restorative justice, it seems that the accent on grassroots volunteerism, that would imply to some that it has a kind of apolitical flavor. And yet, in order to demobilize the existing criminal justice system so that a transformation is possible, it would seem that RJ advocates would need to create or support a political party that has as its platform an effort to bring in changes that resonate with the goals of restorative justice. Would doing that be contrary to the spirit of restorative justice, or should that be on the table? I throw that question out to the panel and the speaker.
Thank you. Panelists?
I think it can be problematic if we politicize restorative justice. And I think, because I don't think it's a left-right sort of debate. And I think they've got beyond that in England right now. I was in the House of Lords, not last February, but the February before, and there was 3 different political parties represented there, and they were all advocating for restorative justice. For different reasons, based on their but they were all advocating for restorative justice, and they'd all either sat in on a restorative justice process, so had an experience of it, either as a direct person involved in a harm or sometimes just as an observer. But, you know, restorative justice as it's developing in England is not a political movement. It's apolitical, and because of that, they're making great strides there right now. They've, you know, a number of years ago, over 20 years ago, we had a paper that came out of our House of Commons called Taking Responsibility, and we really never got behind that, that white paper. And in England, you know, the white paper is becoming green paper. They're engaging the public in a wider campaign about justice, and it's not political.
I think it could be argued that the aims of restorative justice are inherently political because they embody certain values that, from my point of view, all values have a political foundation. But the question is whether there needs to be a concerted movement. The speaker was suggesting that we need to have a maturation of restorative justice as a social movement, which to me ultimately must embrace politics in a more overt manner if you're going to, you know, move the forces that are there and are unwilling to make that accommodation.
Yes, right.
Thank you for saying that. What it makes me think about, and I go back to Liz's teachings, because I'd have the same question. She reminded us, and she would quote Elliott about socialization and the fact that it's every generation that we need to re-socialize. And I joked back to Liz and says, well, you know, I actually socialize my dogs. And she said people are not born with democracy. They're not born with knowing how to relate necessarily to themselves and others. But it grows, and it grows on them. And that points again back to those little things that we can all do, that little drop of water, just keep doing it. And if it needs to go in one path or another, it will find itself. But it's that personal commitment, it's that, crossing of the bridge.
Okay, thank you.
I've been in Canada recently for just 3 years, and one of the things that really surprises me is that nobody seems to pay too much attention to the fact that Canada, Correctional Services Canada, is its own independent prison commission. That there is absolutely no independent prison commission in Canada surprises me, and that the implications of that doesn't seem to be particularly important to the general population. And so addressing the board, I know we're here to talk about restorative justice, but my question is sort of two-pronged. To what degree would instituting and drawing to people's general attention in Canada, the general population, that there are human rights violations going on in Canadian prisons because there isn't an independent prison commission, and how do you see that it might help the development of restorative justice in Canada to implement an independent prison commission for Correctional Services of Canada, rather than individuals like myself feeling the need to be an active human rights watch as I go for visits to the institution?
Okay, thank you. There are a couple of Correctional Service of Canada individuals here. Would you like to respond? Yep, okay. Yeah.
Hi. Maybe I'm perhaps not the best person to respond given my voice. Just in relation to your question, there is the Office of the Correctional Investigator, who is a separate and independent body who often people both that are incarcerated and in the community can communicate in terms of human rights or issues or anything that they feel that their rights are being violated or anywhere in terms of their process of their sentence. And also, I know that in terms of different human rights conventions that have been signed over the years, that there is numerous strategies and different offices within corrections that are proceeding and developing strategies, not just for corrections, but having entire correctional jurisdictions working together at all levels of government as well.
I understand that the Independent Prison Commission that you're talking about is actually paid for. It's a job in the Correctional Services of Canada. The Independent Prison Commission Chief Inspector of Prisons in England is an independent seat in government, so addresses both human rights violations that happen for inmates and also tries to address issues like institutionalized bullying that always happens in certain type of hierarchical structures.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you want to?
Just to follow up with that, I know that I was working on one project in terms of human rights and ensuring the rights of mentally and physically ill people within the system. And one option always with human rights conventions that United Nations human rights conventions that we sign, is an optional protocol. And I think that's perhaps what you're talking to, is an independent body. Because you're correct, the officer of the correctional investigator is a paid body.
Okay, I don't even know if I'm on. I guess I am.
Yeah, you're on. The red light's
Okay,
on.
as far as the correctional investigator's office, you're absolutely correct. It is a paid office. But the most important thing is the correctional investigator only reports to the Correctional Services of Canada. They are not mandated to report to Parliament. So therefore, the human rights violations don't go anyplace unless Parliament's involved. And I'd just sort of like to qualify myself a bit. I've not been involved with restorative justice, but involved with the attempts at obtaining justice in the first place. And I think that's the difficulty. Where politics comes in, one needs to really be political in order to obtain justice. Because really, our system doesn't work. Our laws, they changed all the regulations from the penitentiary service regulations to the current ones. And there was a promise to Parliament that there would be a look at the actual sentencing acts, the sentences, first before they did that. But they did that the other way around. So just to touch on the security issue, if you look at the ways that prisoners can obtain charges, which then defeats them from obtaining family visits and positive reports. You'll see all the time, unfortunately, that the courts that are going on in the institutions there's lawyers that are the judges that appear there, but they really, a lot of times, don't even know anything about correctional law. And correctional law is totally different than the law on the street. All you have to do is look at the reasons why a prisoner could get charged, and you'll see that there's no objective ability. There's no justice possible. How can you be charged with, how can you be strip searched for going in or out of a visit, in or out of your cell, in or out of contact with the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera? It used to be you'd be strip searched for a reasonable and a justifiable cause. So the justice is out of the system in Canada. And to qualify myself further, I met Liz when she taught in the prison education program, when I was the only woman incarcerated in a men's prison in BC, in Canada actually. And she was the most amazing person. And we stayed in touch for many years. And I've been on full parole for 15 years, and I'll be on parole for life. But, I appreciate the concepts of restorative justice. And Dr. Zehr, I've read all your books, and have paid attention to you over the years with great admiration. And it would be wonderful to see the whole thing come together. But, you know, you ask, how are you going to make the next step? Believe it or not, you have to politicize it. And you need a political party behind you, at least, you know, one branch of a political party. And because it's all about power, isn't it? You know, you can't restore something that's not even there. And I know how pessimistic this sounds, but that's the reality for people that are inside prisons now, particularly for women. Things are much worse since the Arbor Commission, because CSE just refused to implement the changes that she mandated by law. So if the CSE don't have to obey the law, then how can it be a just place? How can restorative justice, you know, get a bigger hold, get a better hold?
First off, I'd like to just comment on both Howard's and Barry's remarks about the values. One of the sayings that comes to mind when I was listening to you was, be the person you wish your children to see. And Barry talked about our kids, and it starts with kids. And that reminded me of the recycling initiatives many decades ago when I was a child, and how I brought home the 3 R's, reduce, recycle, and reuse, to my parents and educated them. And I believe that if we stick with our moral compass and our moral energy and show the restorative values to our children, and I think implementing them in the schools is very, very important. I think that this movement will move forward, and it will become a social movement, and I see our young people moving this forward. The other comment I wanted to make was the third value of relationships, and how we do need to network, and we do need to talk to each other, and we do need to share if we wish this to become something bigger. So I really appreciate the comments that you both made, and I see this as maybe an impetus to us to take those values and do something with them. So thank you.
Thank you. Colleen.
Yeah, I would like to thank the gentleman over to my right, you, for bringing up the issue of politics, because I can't even imagine how one could have a serious discussion about how to alter the culture of punishment without, in fact, confronting the politics. And most of us who have been, I'd had my first, we used to call it alternatives to prison experience starting in 1970. And we became very quickly what we called prison abolitionists. We want to abolition an institution that is powerfully destructive. We want to abolish an institution that is profoundly racist in every single country in the world. And to speak about prisons without speaking about racism is, I think, being very evasive about what politics is and what shifting power and learning how to redistribute power so that it is within every one of us, so that we do, in fact, have within us the capacity to make change, not only in our immediate circle, but certainly on a wider political scale.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
It's a very interesting debate about the various ingredients for social change. And just a reminder, you know, we are the city with Adbusters that started 1,500 protests around the world on behalf of the 99%. Yet we turn on our television stations and all we hear about is how crazy the protesters are. A lot of us don't realize that the 1% own most of the networks. So 15 years ago, I had the privilege of joining the board of the Canadian Association for Media Education. And as General Schwarzkopf told us, in any conflict today, the first target is communications. So here I am, I'm a civilian, but I'm honored to work with all of these teachers, some of whom are regarded as some of the top media literacy teachers in the world. And we wrote all the IRPs for the BC Ministry of Education on media literacy, and every year we've seen more of that curriculum taken out, except at SFU, you're leaders in communication nationally. But for the most part in the public school system, it's been diluted, and on the sidelines, especially working with so many gifted teachers trying to affect change, you start to wonder whether actually when everybody goes home and the lights go out at night, whether big government's worst nightmare isn't the success of our teachers and educated citizens. And in my day job, I'm fighting big corporations over ethics, and you know, their worst nightmare seems to be educated consumers. So I think we have to understand we're all a lot easier to manage as long as we stay stupid. I was very honored to call Lizzie my friend. She's very bright, and as it was said at our healing circle, she was a professional shit disturber. Maybe you guys in this room can show the rest of us how to get it together, because we sure need some leadership. Thank you.
Maybe it was your comments and Carlene's, but I remember Liz reminding me of classic feminist work by Marilyn French, in which she says the personal is the political, and there's no way to separate the two ultimately. You've got to act politically and personally and keep those two very much in a dialectic that is profound.
My experience, though, working in ethics in fighting some big corporations is that as soon as I can be allied with any ethnic or a religious or a political field, 70% of the people can stop listening. We've taken billionaire corporations to court now 5 times and beaten them 4 out of 5 times just because we can't be marginalized by being the other political force. I'm just saying that I think these demands should be of every party.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I want to pick up on Howard's number 5 point where he says we have to take our work home with us. And our stories are often about other people's lives who have changed and how we can hold them up, especially in the context of the judicial system. And I wanted to perhaps change the course of the dialogue today to ask this question. And that's, can we start telling our own stories of how restorative justice has impacted our own lives? And I actually wanted to ask, I don't know, maybe Howard and 1 or 2 or all of the panel to say, you know what, how has restorative justice affected you personally? What difference has it made around the dining room table?
Thank you for the challenge. Dave, you're leaning forward in anticipation. I sense something's going to come any minute now, and there it is.
You are highly prescient, Rob. I think for me, restorative justice has profoundly changed the way I've parented my children. They're all in high 20s or early 30s now, and I think they would say to you that one of the first things we learned to do in our household was sit down on a carpet and have a circle. We mediated all kinds of things. I recall a very early thing where we were sitting around. I was talking about what a delight each of them were when they were little children. And I said, and Johanna asked me, Dad, what was my first word? And I said, well, yours was light. We lived in a little tiny cold water flat in Scotland above a bakery. And we had a naked light bulb in our bedroom. And so whenever I took her in there to change her because her room was too low for me to stand up in or whatever, she would point to this thing and vocalize until I said light. That was the first word out of her mouth. So at the table, Christopher says, what was my first word? And Johanna turns to him and says, mediation. And it's actually fairly true. It has had a profound effect on the way we've organized our family, I think.
I got a real lesson in family experience, taking your work home. So, when I was quite a bit older, 60, I inherited a family of twin teenagers. Never having been in a family before, you can imagine what a shock that was. And as teenagers will do, they got into some trouble at school, trouble that might have got them kicked out. So we did a circle. And then that worked fine. And then later they got into some other trouble outside the school, and we did a circle again about that trouble. And then one morning I'm driving them both to school, and I'm saying, tonight we're going to do a circle. And they said to me, what did we do wrong now? The circle was going to be about where we were going to go on our vacation. And it really taught me that, you know, you don't just save these things for trouble. you create a capacity for people to talk, because what they learn about being respected about their opinion about where they should go on a vacation is about how to learn to respect other people generally, no matter what the topic might be. The most powerful mediator I've ever met, no disrespect to David, is the talking piece, right? Because it really creates space for each person to talk in a fundamentally different way. And now, I do circles, on a regular basis. You don't wait for something to come out. Something's going in a circle. Every time I've done it, something is brewing back there that comes out. We get to talk about it before it becomes a major problem. It comes out and gets talked with. So yeah, it changed my way of being, for sure.
I think I lost a point as well, and that's that all three of those kids, now they're grown adults, carry those values into their own workplaces and their own relationships. One works with First Nations kids downtown East Side. He does marvelous work. He's a peacemaker in his own right. My daughter similarly does sort of off the side of her desk social work in Gibson's Seashell Peninsula. She's highly regarded there. She's just a peacemaker and conflict resolver through and through. And the middle one tries to do it through music, I guess, and stitch together the world. So it's interesting to see how they live out those values. And a joy, frankly.
Because I have young children too, I was heavily immersed in this field at the same time I was giving birth to my first child. I remember Margaret Thorsborn, I was about to present a conference paper at my very first Restorative Justice conference down at the Australian National University, and I was about to give birth to my first son. And Margaret Thorsborn, who works in schools down there, she says, "Cross your legs, Brenda." You've got something to say. I didn't cross it hard enough, and I didn't. So Val Braithwaite presented my paper. But it's interesting in terms of these values thing, this value debate that we're talking about. And I think when you talk about values, it becomes political. You can't talk about values without politics or politics without values. And one of the things I learned about values down at the Australian National University when I was working with Val Braithwaite, and she's a values researcher. And she says most of us, or all of us, carry two bundles of values. We have a bundle of security values and a bundle of harmony values. And it's how we marry those together that's really important. That we don't, like Barack Obama said, that we don't have to give up security for that other set of values. It's how we marry security with harmony in terms of those fundamental value systems that we all hold. And she did other research that shows when we live in fear, when we create cultures of fear, we give up our harmony values in the name of security and we vote more conservatively. So it's all mixed up together, and we have to think about the concert between these two systems, between our harmony values and our security values, and how we weave them together is really important. And I always try to think of the balance, of what the balance is here. And sometimes in my family, because I'm immersed in the field of restorative justice, around my family table, because sometimes they're really, don't want to hear another word about that RJ land, round the table, and it's, the thing I need to do then is to know when to shut up. So on that note, someone else.
Howard.
When somebody asks me that question, one of the first things I think, to be honest, is some of my failures, and also the difficulties of trying to practice what I preach with a child who deals with mental illness and some brain damage, and all the challenges of doing that. But the other story that came to me wasn't from my family life, it was from my early life in restorative justice. The program I had founded and had directed for a while, I was now on the board, and we were having particular troubles with a staff person, a director, and we were all sitting there on the board talking about bringing suit against her, when suddenly it dawned on me, aren't we about restorative justice and mediation and things like that? And we suddenly realized we had just lost track. We were going this legal route. It's such an easy default. And it's just an example of the kind of thing we talk about, whether we can really practice this stuff in our own personal and professional lives, to me.
I just wanted to say thank you, and because to me, it's those stories, if we can somehow blend those stories of taking restorative justice home with us, with all of our discussions in regardless of what profession we're working in, somehow it just seems to come to life a little bit more.
Mr. Elliott.
I won't speak too long. I'm not a criminologist, a sociologist, so you folks are the experts. This is very, very interesting discussion. Firstly, I'd just like, on behalf of my parents as well, who couldn't make it here, to thank Rob and Brenda and of course Dave and Barry and Howard, everyone who came today, but for organizing this. And this is exactly what Liz would love to see, just discussion around the circle, and have this sort of person-by-person, community-level discussion on RJ to get it, infiltrating into society. I just wanted to, I'm going to jump around and just share with you a couple of points, and then I'll be quiet. First of all, I wanted to mention to Barry that Liz loved Monty Python too. So I used to go to her apartment when I was a teenager and listen to all her Monty Python records. And the first time I really experienced anything to do with criminology with Liz was when she was still in Kingston, and she helped organize the Special Olympiad in the Collins Bay Medium Security Institution in Kingston, Ontario. I think that was in the summer of '83 and maybe '84. She did it a couple of years. And that was a real transformational experience for me. And it wasn't maybe directly RJ, but it's, as one lady said, there's a lot of these facets of justice that come to light. And it was a weekend where these inmates were paired with, younger persons that were Down syndrome, and they were a team for that whole weekend. One lady or gentleman was with an inmate, and those inmates were just pushing their partners as hard as they could to do the long jump, the high jump, whatever it was, and they were all getting trophies Sunday afternoon, and it was just a heartwarming experience, I have to say. And to me, that showed what positive, creative things can be done behind those prison walls to make everybody feel better about themselves. There was no judgment going on amongst people in that environment. To reflect what Marion was saying too, and Liz's point was always compassion. It's good but not good enough. You have to act, and this is what I think we all, what I'm hearing today is, be it in the schools or be it at home, of course. As Dave was saying, at home, this is where RJ can start. We can't expect the politicians, the legislatures, to impose RJ on society. I think it's a combination of, obviously, government, the economy, working together. I also agree with Barry's point. I think from an economic point of view, you have to hit people's pocketbook, either positively or negatively. And if they feel that they're saving, each Canadian's saving $500 a year on their tax bill because prisons are being run more effectively, then, hey, they're going to go for it. So I think there has to be different ways of approaching RJ to make it happen. To me, a tragic irony is that the little I know of the history of RJ and the Aboriginal community, I think Barry said it's only really been in the forefront 30 years, and yet we also hear that it's been around maybe for thousands of years if we look at the Aboriginal communities. And yet a large number of our prisoners are Aboriginal, so it's sort of, to me, tragic that it's worked that way. Anyway, it's a complex challenge, but I really appreciate the work that everyone is doing here, and I think hopefully there'll be a paradigm shift in society, and that we'll all waken up and see that what you're doing is the right thing here. It's just how do we get it to the next level? And I think that's the challenge. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Merlin, you're on.
I think it would be safe to say that Liz not only took her work home, but she took it to the grocery store and she took it to the schoolyard. She sometimes took it to the side of the road. Liz's good day would be coming home and telling us all that she saw a fist fight break out on the side of the road, and she had an opportunity to stop and talk to everyone involved and find out what the issue was and offer them compassionate responses and perhaps a ride or a coffee. Another instance, you know, of Liz taking it to the streets and walking it was then, you know, Dave, she used to quote you and say, you know, it's not who you are, it's who you be. You know, the 3-year-old having the temper tantrum in the grocery store, and instead of having the judgmental response, and instead of, you know, looking at that parent going, geez, you know, you really don't have it together, Liz would be the one walking up to the mom and saying, you know, are you okay? Can I give you a hand? Do you need a grocery cart, or do you need somebody to push that grocery cart for you? It was an active process for her. I met Liz because they wanted to move the French immersion program out of the elementary school that my son went to. And Liz's kids also went to that elementary school, so she felt very strongly about it. I went to a meeting after school, the way these things happen, and everyone else was all up in arms, and this short lady with really long blonde hair stood up in the front of about 120 of us and said, this is a talking piece, and we're going to give it to everybody, and you're all going to be able to talk for as long as you want. I was horrified, right? I've been in crowds. I know that you can get trapped there for hours. And we did. We sat there for 2.5 hours. But every person who left there left feeling heard. And even if they passed that piece and didn't say something, knew that they'd have had the opportunity to be heard. So it's not just about taking it home. It's about the grocery store, and it's about the side of the street, and it's about the school district. And it's about your school or your son's school or your friend's son's school. It wasn't just something that she donned or she railed against an institution, or it was about going into jail, or it was about having non-shame-based conversations about everything at every opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. It's really a gift to hear these stories and parts of Liz's life, and to feel inspired by that, and to have heard the remarks of the panel. And my question actually relates to something that you said, Howard, toward the end of your talk, when you talked about aesthetic vision. You talked about how you think there's a lot of hope in the arts, and I think that all of your panel members know something about that and care about that, but I wondered if you or others would speak a bit more about how aesthetic vision, how work which is arts-based is really an important part of restorative justice work.
Well, I think I'm still on the journey to understanding that in our program, as I teach in this graduate program. But my colleagues are mostly social scientists. And so it's been kind of a challenge to try to think, but we're getting there. We have more and more of our students are coming with an artistic background. They're wanting ways to explore. And so we started, a colleague and I, who you've met, Paulette and I have started teaching a course called Research as Art and Transformation, as I mentioned. And what this field is saying is that in the area of research, the arts can be used to gain new knowledge, so that you might put people in a play, or have them draw and then draw out of them things. Or it can be used to test knowledge, so that you might find things out in a more conventional research method and then test it by creating a drama, see if it rings true and so forth, or as a way of presenting material that you have found. And so we're teaching this using it in this whole range of things. Well, I've always found that, I mean, I do these books, for instance, you know, I think as a photographer, I think much of our learning and communication is visual. The research tells us that. And then when we only rely on words, on verbal, we're missing about 80–90% of the communication capability. And so my commitment has always been to using both the visual and the verbal. But it's only more recently that I've been able to work with people. Like I worked with a theater artist. My book Transcending, which is photographs and interviews with people who've gone through severe violence, she created a play made up of probably 70% of the play is actual words from people in there. And we traveled it. We showed it to some of the victims who were in it saw it and were just moved at how true it rang and how they would love to. This one woman said, "I've been trying to tell my community what it's like, and if this play would come, it would help do that." But then we took it on tour in prison. And with the first night, we opened in this huge prison, 4,500 men. We had a room for 500 men. The superintendent warned us that the last public event they had was a band. And by the end of the concert, nobody was left in there. So, you know, people might leave. It was incredible. We had not a soul left. The level of, there was tears everywhere. One of the victims from the book was present. We hadn't told the group that it was there. At the end of the play, the actors and the playwright and I sat on the stage and just had a dialogue with the audience, partly to help them come down from the intensity of this play. And somebody started asking a question about why Lynn, the survivor whose children were murdered, why she acted the way she did. And Ingrid, the playwright, began to answer the question, and because she didn't want to reveal that Lynn was there. And Lynn got up and said, "I'm Jen and Dave's mother." And it was just incredible. I don't think there was a dry eye in the house. And the guys that came up after her afterwards were confessing to things. I mean, one guy I'd known for years, he's a great guy. I never heard him say what he did. He told her, he just laid out what he had done. And she had, I mean, this is getting long here, but she had told me when I interviewed her, she said, "I know I need to forgive. I grew up Catholic, but I'm going to wait till the last 15 seconds when I'm on my deathbed, and then I'll forgive him, you know." And then she later told me, "Well, you know, I'm starting to think about it. I'm going to have to forgive if I'm going to move on with my life." And so after this, she had said, then she'd looked at my other book, the Doing Life book. She'd seen that and said, "I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm starting to feel some compassion for prisoners. I'd like to go with you." And that's why we took her to prison. Now she goes into prison. And that's what, on a regular basis. That, I think, is the transforming power of the arts. I don't think a lecture would ever have done that. I think we learned a lot about the dynamics of victimization through that process, and we impacted a lot of people through that way. So that's just one personal example of what I think the power of the arts are for both discovery and for communication.
Thank you. And the last word.
The whole premise of restorative justice is having parties come together and speak their sides and tell their stories. And it makes me think of something last week that I had the honor, and it truly was an honor, to listen to Senator Romeo Dallaire speak. And he was one of the commanders for the UN peacekeeping mission in Rwanda genocide in '94. And he now is a champion for human rights and working with countries in conflict and also in the prevention of genocide. And a story that he said it really inspired me. It makes me think about restorative justice. And it may be a very extreme example, but it certainly rings true for me. He talks about how a unit with a colonel, with a commander. I've never been in military. I don't know the rank, but it was they were driving down a street and there was about 16 of them, and the commanding officer saw a child, and it was a very young 8-year-old child, and they were always kind of conditioned not to stop because it could be a setup for who knows what, because having the children as ploys. But the Canadian troops stopped, and they all got out, and they were trying to figure out what was happening, and there was people dead in the streets, and the child was crying, and they walked a little farther, and they saw that there was like a whole number of people that were mostly women and children that were either dying or had been hurt very badly. And he was telling this story to a number of other commanders that were at the same base, and asking, what would you have your men do in a situation like that? And almost all of them said, "You know what, I would tell them to drive on because it's too dangerous in terms of being set up, or in terms of getting infectious diseases. The liabilities are too high, and there's too many people to save." So they said, "Well, what did the Canadians do?" And they said, "Well, the commander, the officer in charge, before he had a chance, all of them were in this ditch with these people, trying to save them." And it just kind of speaks to holding on to your values and being inspired and having the courage to do what you feel is right, and that's, you know, in terms of stories, I hope people get a chance to hear people and their stories, and that they do get inspired, because I think this is really important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've reached the end of the afternoon session. My thanks to Dr. Howard Zehr for coming all the way from the East Coast and inspiring us yet again. To the panelists, Brenda, Dave, and Barry, they don't have last names. To the Ting family for supporting this and other Ting forums. To the Correctional Service of Canada, also our partners in these Ting forums. And of course, to Liz Elliott, who I think was probably here this afternoon. Thank you very much. You can all go now.